This overlooked Final Fantasy commander lets you steal spells, print treasures, and win games. And all of that on a €50 budget. Vaan, Street Thief. Let's talk about Vaan, a sneaky little 3-drop from the new Final Fantasy set that no one seems to be talking about. Seriously, when I first looked into this commander, I expected to find a ton of builds, primers, maybe even some in-depth guides, but there's barely anything out there. No solid guides, no deep dives, just a really powerful underplayed commander that's really flying under the radar. And honestly, that's really wild, because Vaan isn't just a unique and a cool card, he's actually really strong. For just 3 mana, you get a 2/2 creature with 2 unique abilities that feed directly into each other, creating an incredibly fun gameplay loop. First up, whenever 1 or more scouts, pirates, or rogues deal combat damage to a player, we get to exile the top card of that player's library. Then we get the option to cast the exiled card, or when we don't, we get to create a treasure token instead. This ability really actively encourages us to build around those 3 specific creature types. And all 3 of those tribes have access to cheap, aggressive, and evasive creatures that are just perfect for this type of deck. The idea for this deck is really simple. Get in early with a lot of creatures that will give us Vaan triggers and start generating an immense amount of value, either by casting our opponent's spells or by generating treasure tokens. Whenever we cast a spell we don't own, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on every scout, pirate, or rogue creature we control. This second ability rewards us for actually playing those stolen cards, turning value into even more board pressure and growing our entire board. And this effect doesn't only trigger off Vaan's first ability. It works with any card we play that allows us to cast spells from opponents' libraries. So obviously we're running a ton of theft cards, allowing us to play our opponent's decks. The result is a very aggressive scaling value engine where every part of the loop feeds into the next. We attack and we get to exile cards or generate treasure tokens. Then we cast those stolen cards from exile and we get to grow our board. Then we just get to swing again with our board that's already buffed up by the +1/+1 counters. Just one important detail about Vaan's ability, he will only trigger once per player per combat. So for example, if you send 3 creatures at one single opponent, you will only exile 1 of the top cards of their library. But if you swing with 3 creatures, 1 going at each opponent, and they all connect, you will get to exile 1 card of each of their libraries, resulting in 3 Vaan triggers. So 3 stolen spells or 3 treasure tokens. We really want to spread our attacks, attacking as many opponents as possible, just to ensure we get as much Vaan triggers as possible. I decided to build this deck on a really tight €50 budget. And honestly, it became my favorite little pet deck. Cheap, interactive, and a ton of fun to play at casual tables. You get early pressure, you get to snowball hard, and you get to use your opponent's most expensive cards against them. What's not to love about this deck? As per usual, I will be going over every single card I decided to include in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up in 6 categories: the scouts, pirates, and rogues, the cast from exile and theft cards, the treasure and ramp support, interaction and utility, the lands, and as promised, in the end, I will do an upgrade section where I will be talking about cards you can include in the deck if you don't care about the €50 budget. First up, we have the scouts, pirates, and rogues. This is where it all starts. These are your low-cost evasive creatures that will give you a Vaan trigger whenever they deal combat damage to an opponent. Since in this deck we want to be hitting opponents as much as possible, I focused on the most efficient and evasive creatures in these 3 tribes. First up, we have Kellan, Planar Trailblazer, a 1-drop that has more text than most planeswalkers do. It's a 1 mana 2/1 scout creature with 2 activated abilities. For 2 mana, we can turn Kellan into a human fairy detective, and whenever he deals combat damage to a player, we get to exile the top card of our library. Then we are allowed to play that card until the end of our turn, giving us some sort of card advantage. Do keep in mind, whenever Kellan is at this stage, he is a fairy human detective, so he won't be a scout, pirate, or rogue anymore, so he won't trigger Vaan at his second stage. If Kellan is at his second stage, we can pay 3 mana to make him go to his third stage, turning him into a 3/2 human fairy rogue with double strike. And at this stage, he will give us some crazy benefits. First up, a 3/2 double strike creature is already really solid. If we can manage to get some counters on this creature with Vaan's ability, he will turn into an absolute huge body and he will deal a ton of damage thanks to the double strike. If we do do manage to deal combat damage with Callan at this stage, he will deal 2 instances of damage, triggering the effect of his first ability twice, meaning we get to exile the top 2 cards of our library and we can cast those cards until the end of our turn. And at his third stage, he also is a rogue again. So if we do have Vaan on the field and Callan connects for combat damage, he will deal damage twice, giving us 2 Vaan triggers, allowing us to steal 2 cards or create 2 treasure tokens. And you get all of those awesome effects on just a 1 mana body. Thin Street Dodger, a 1 mana 1/1 goblin rogue with haste. The fact that this little dude has haste means you can instantly swing with him the turn he comes down. So even if you draw this card later in the game, you can just play it, and whenever you have Vaan on the field, you do have an extra rogue body to swing with, connect with, and get some Vaan triggers. But it doesn't stop there. He even has an activated ability. For 1 red mana, Thin Street Dodger can only be blocked by creatures with Defender for the remainder of this turn, essentially making him unblockable, because let's be honest, who plays Defender creatures nowadays? Since this ability essentially makes him unblockable, it guarantees us a Vaan trigger whenever we activate this and swing with this. Brazen Collector. For 2 mana, you get a 2/1 first strike Raccoon Rogue. First up, let's talk about the first strike, because this mechanic is really busted when combined with Vaan. Let's say you have a Vaan, a first strike creature, and a normal creature on the battlefield. You then decide to swing with the 2 creatures at 1 single opponent. First, we will go to the first strike damage step, so you will get a Vaan trigger. Then you go to the normal damage step and the normal creature will deal damage, resulting in another Vaan trigger. Since the first strike and the normal strike happen at 2 different times, this will result in you getting 2 Vaan triggers instead of the usual 1. So obviously we want to be playing as much first strike and double strike creatures as possible, because they will result in double the Vaan triggers. Whenever we attack with Brazen Collector, we get to add 1 red mana to our mana pool, and we don't lose it as steps or phases end until the end of turn. So this mana will still be available after the combat phase has ended in your second main phase, so you can actually use it to cast some other spells, meaning this card basically ramps us by 1 mana whenever we attack with it. Perfect fit for the deck. Charming Scoundrel, a 2 mana 1/1 rogue with haste. Whenever it enters a battlefield, we get to choose 1 of 3 fantastic options. First option allows us to loot, meaning we can discard a card to draw a card, basically filtering our deck. The second option allows us to create a treasure token, accelerating our mana. And the third option allows us to create a Wicked Roll token and attach it to any creature we control. A Wicked Roll token will give a creature +1/1, and whenever this token leaves the battlefield, every opponent will lose 1 life. All 3 of these options are fantastic, but you'll mainly be using the first 2 options. The first card just allows you to ditch any cards you don't need anymore into the graveyard and give you new cards, and the treasure token will just accelerate us by 1 turn, allowing us to play our huge threats 1 turn earlier. The fact that you get all of this on a 1/1 haste rogue body that will give you a Vaan trigger whenever you connect with her is just crazy. Kari Zeph, Skyship Raider, a 2 mana 1/3 body with first strike and menace. These 2 keywords are the perfect combination for what we're trying to achieve in this type of deck. The first strike will allow you to get extra Vaan triggers in the first strike damage step, and the menace will make it so that this creature is a little harder to block, allowing us to deal combat damage and get those Vaan triggers we want. Whenever we attack with this creature, we also get to create a 2/1 legendary monkey creature named Ragavan. The token will enter tapped and attacking, and at the end of combat we do have to exile that token. Sadly, like the real Ragavan, this card isn't a pirate, so we won't be getting any extra triggers of Vaan with this. But I suppose a 2/1 body joining your board whenever you attack with this is a little bit of added pressure for your opponents. Reckless Pyro Surfer, a 2 mana 2/2 scout with haste. Thanks to his landfall ability, this is one of the more aggressive cards in the deck. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under our control, this card will gain an instance of Battle Cry, meaning whenever you attack with this card, each other attacking creature we control will gain +1/+0 until the end of turn, really upping the aggression. If you do have multiple lands entering the battlefield under your control, you will get multiple instances of Battle Cry on this card, and they will each trigger separately. So if you do decide to upgrade this deck and include some fetch lands, you will be able to get 2 land drops in one single turn, meaning you will get 2 instances of Battle Cry. And the fact that you can play this, drop a land and instantly swing with it because it has haste means that this is a really strong creature, especially in an aggressive deck like this one. Breaches, Eager Pillager, a 3 mana 3/3 creature with first strike. I don't even know where to start with this card since it has a ton of abilities and every single one of them is just fantastic. It is a pirate and it has first strike, so it will guarantee us a Vaan trigger in the first strike damage step. Whenever a pirate we control attacks, we get to choose one of 3 fantastic options that hasn't been chosen yet this turn. So if you want to get all 3 triggers, you will have to attack with 3 pirates in a single turn. The first option allows us to create a treasure token, accelerating our mana. The second option allows us to make one creature not be able to block this turn. This will allow us to get some combat damage in and get additional Vaan triggers. And the third option allows us to exile the top card of our library and we are allowed to play it this turn, giving us some sort of card advantage. In this deck, we also play cards that give us a benefit whenever we cast cards from exile, so this ability is just perfect for the deck. We do play a total of 10 other pirate creatures in the deck, and since Breaches is a pirate himself, you will always be able to choose at least one of these options whenever you attack with him. Talking about pirates, Coastline Marauder, a 3 mana 0/3 pirate with trample. Whenever this creature attacks, it will get +1/0 for each land the defending player controls. Early in the game, this will be a 3/3 trample body if you do decide to swing with it the turn it comes down, but later in the game when opponents actually control like 10 lands or something, this will be a 10/3 trample creature. This will allow you to deal a ton of damage to an opponent, and thanks to the trample you will also ensure you get a Vaan trigger because this creature will always be dealing combat damage thanks to its huge power. If this was the only ability on the card, I'd still include it in the deck, but it even has the Encore mechanic for 6 mana. Encore means we can exile this card from our graveyard by paying the Encore cost, and we do get to create a token copy of this card for each opponent in the game. Then those token copies will gain haste and they will have to attack this turn if able. Then at the end of our turn, we have to exile these tokens. So later in the game, if your opponents did manage to deal with the original copy of this creature and it ends up in your graveyard, we can just activate the Encore cost, create 3 copies and swing them at each opponent. If you are then late in the game and they all control like 10 lands, you will have 3 10/3 trample creatures swinging at each opponent. And if you then have Vaan on the field, since these creatures are pirates, they will all give you Vaan triggers, meaning you will get treasures or steal some cards and use them against your opponents. This card can really close out games if you are able to cast it for its Encore cost. Crimson Caravaneer, a 3 mana 1/2 double strike trample body. The fact that this card has both double strike and trample means it scales incredibly well with any form of power boost. For example, if you have Vaan on the field and you cast some spells you don't own, this card will get +1/+1 counters, and the power on this stacks up really fast. If you are just able to cast 4 spells you don't own, this will be a 5/6 trample double strike body. Pretty good for just 3 mana. Whenever this card deals combat damage to an opponent, we get to create a junk token. Junk tokens are basically artifacts you can tap to exile the top card of your library, and you can cast that card until the end of turn. You can just use these tokens whenever you want to gain some card advantage. And as mentioned before, we do play a ton of cards in the deck that actually benefits from us casting spells from exile. Thanks to the double strike, whenever this creature is unblocked, we will deal damage with it twice, meaning we will get 2 Vaan triggers and 2 junk tokens. 1 in the first strike damage step and 1 in the double strike damage step. Powder Ganger, a 3 mana 2/2 human rogue. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to destroy up to 1 target artifact. Nowadays, in modern day Magic, a ton of decks rely on playing artifacts, be it soul rings, mana rocks, a Phyrexian altar, treasure tokens, clue tokens, whatever. This creature will always have a target whenever it enters the battlefield. And this card also has the squat mechanic, meaning whenever we cast it, we can pay 2 generic mana any amount of times. For every time we pay the extra 2 generic mana, this creature enters with a token copy of itself. This deck does play some treasure synergies, be it treasures of Vaan or of any other cards we have in the deck, so later in the game we will always have access to a ton of mana. When you do, you can just cast this creature, pay 8 extra mana, and you will have a total of 5 creature copies of this card entering the battlefield, allowing you to destroy 5 artifacts. Prosperous Bandit, another raccoon rogue we play in the deck. It's a 3 mana 2/2 creature with first strike. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, we get to create that many treasure tokens. Since the whole game plan of this deck is connecting with as much pirates, scouts and rogues as possible, this card just fits that strategy perfectly. Whenever this card connects, we will get Vaan triggers, especially thanks to the first strike, and we will get to generate treasure tokens equal to its power. If we then cast some cards we don't own with Vaan, this creature will get +1/+1 counters, and whenever it connects, we will get to generate even more treasure tokens. And this card also has the Bloom Burrow mechanic Offspring, meaning whenever we cast this card and we pay 1 additional generic mana, this creature will enter with a 1/1 token copy of itself. This token copy will be a 1/1 first strike rogue creature with the same ability as this card. So basically, for a total of 4 mana, you get 2 rogue first strike bodies with an awesome ability whenever they deal combat damage. Pretty good deal. Swashbuckler Extraordinaire. For 3 mana, you get a 2/2 creature that whenever it enters a battlefield generates you 1 treasure token. A fun little note on this deck, you actually do need the treasure tokens for Vaan, because when you connect with Vaan, you exile a blue spell that costs like 3 blue mana pips. You can't generate any blue mana with lands you control, since we are a mono red deck. So you will have to use 3 treasures to generate blue mana to actually be able to cast spells outside of mono red. This card also has a really good activated ability for this type of deck. Whenever we attack, we get to sacrifice 1 or more treasure tokens. Then for every treasure token we sacrifice, target creature will get double strike until the end of turn. Like I've been talking about this entire video, double strike is one of the best mechanics in the deck because our creatures will deal a ton of damage and they will deal damage twice, meaning we get double the Vaan triggers. Treasure Nabber, a 3 mana 3/2 goblin rogue. Whenever an opponent taps an artifact for mana, we get to gain control of that artifact until the end of our next turn. This honestly is one of the better cards you can play in a mono red deck, especially if you play in a pot where people play a ton of mana rocks. Let's say you cast this on turn 3, you pass the turn, opponent 1 decides to tap their Sol Ring to cast their commander or whatever, opponent 2 doesn't do anything, and opponent 3 decides to tap a Rakdos Signet to cast one of their spells. You will then gain control of the Sol Ring and the Signet, and whenever you untap, you will have access to 3 additional mana. And it's not just once. As long as this creature stays on the battlefield, you will just get to gain a ton of mana from your opponent's mana rocks. It's a really annoying and obnoxious cards for your opponents to deal with, and they will really think twice about activating their mana rocks. Veronica, Dissident Scribe. It's a 3 mana 3/3 rogue with Menace. Menace will make this creature a little harder to block and is just fantastic to get additional Vaan triggers with. Whenever this creature attacks, we get to loot, meaning we can discard a card to draw a new card. A perfect way later in the game to ditch any lands in your hand that you don't need anymore into your graveyard and replace them with some new cards. And whenever we discard our first non-land card from our hand every single turn, we get to create a junk token. This is just an awesome rogue body that allows us to filter our deck by looting and will give us junk tokens, translating in some solid card advantage whenever we need it. Coercive Recruiter, a 5 mana 4/3 pirate. Whenever this creature or any other pirate enters the battlefield under our control, we get to gain control of target creature an opponent controls. We then get to untap it, it will gain haste, and it will become a pirate until the end of turn. So later in the game, we can use this to gain control of one of our opponent's strongest creatures and actually swing at them with it. And since the creature will be a pirate in addition to its other types, this will also give us a Vaan trigger, using all our opponent's cards against themselves. And it doesn't stop there, because this card says whenever it or any other pirate enters the battlefield, the ability will trigger. Meaning whenever we play one of our other 10 pirates in the deck, we will get an additional trigger on this card, allowing us to steal another creature. If you can only play this card itself and get 1 trigger, the value is already really good. But if you can follow up with some additional pirates, the value just gets out of control. Portraiser, a 5 mana 4/4 pirate. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, we get to untap all creatures we control and we get an additional combat phase after this one. Portraiser can't attack any player it has already attacked this turn. This honestly is one of the best extra combat cards in the entirety of Magic. Let me just show you an example of how crazy Portraiser can be under the right circumstances. Let's say you have Vaan a port raiser, and 2 other creatures on the battlefield. You go to combat and you swing 1 creature at each opponent. For some magical reason, if the stars align, no creature is blocked. You will then gain 3 Vaan triggers because you dealt damage to 3 different players. Port raiser also did damage to an opponent, so you get to untap all your creatures and you get an additional combat phase. You repeat this process and you swing at all 3 opponents again. This time, port raiser is attacking opponent 2 because you can't attack opponent 1 anymore. 3 additional Vaan triggers and an additional port raiser trigger. Untap everything, you swing again, and this time port raiser is going at opponent 3. You will get to deal damage again, you will get 3 additional Vaan triggers, and then you untap everything and you get an extra combat phase. This time you can't attack anymore with port raiser since it already attacked all 3 opponents. You then swing with Vaan and the other 2 creatures and you get an additional 3 Vaan triggers, resulting in a total of 12 Vaan triggers. I know this is an absolute best case scenario where your opponents don't have any blockers, any interaction, but just imagine this happening. Yeah, the value will just be insane. You will be able to steal a ton of spells and you will be able to generate a ton of treasure tokens. I don't know, man, I just really love Port Raiser. It's such an awesome card in the multiplayer format. Dargo the Shipwrecker. It's a whopping 7 mana, 7/5 trample pirate. This is by far the biggest creature we play in the deck. As an additional cost to this spell, we can sacrifice any amount of artifacts and or creatures. Then the cost of Dargo is reduced by 2 generic mana per creature we already sacrificed or per creature or artifact we sacrificed for this ability. Now, why is he good in this deck? Let's just say you generated some treasure tokens of Vaan and you control 3 treasures. You tap these treasures, you sacrifice them. Since we sacrificed 3 artifacts this turn, Dargo saw this and his cost will be reduced by the 6 mana and we are able to cast them for 1 mana. The purpose of Dargo is not directly sacrificing creatures or artifacts to cast them. We will just be doing our game plan, sacrificing our treasures to cast any spells we control or we exiled with Vaan, and then we will be able to follow up with a 1 mana 7/5 trample creature, which will always be a huge threat. If you really like this type of content and you want to support me and the channel, check out the YouTube membership program. All members will get access to monthly deck polls where you can vote on what commander I will be doing this type of video about next, sneak peeks and early access to the decks I'm currently working on, access to some awesome Panzer MTG emojis you can use anywhere on Discord and YouTube, and at the highest tier you can even support your deck for a review by me. Big thanks to all the current YouTube members. If you want to check it out, click the join button or check the link in the description below. Next up we have the Cast from Exile Synergies and the Theft cards in the deck. These cards really push Vaan's second ability to the limit, casting cards we don't own. Some cards help us with exiling cards from our opponent's libraries and allow us to cast them, and some cards reward us when we do so. Dire Fleet Daredevil, a 2 mana 2/1 first strike pirate. Already a really solid body because it is a pirate and it will give us additional Vaan triggers thanks to the first strike damage step. Whenever this card enters the battlefield, we get to exile 1 instant or sorcery spell from an opponent's graveyard. We can then cast it for the remainder of this turn and we can spend mana of any color, allowing us to get a Vaan trigger, putting counters on all our rogues, pirates or scouts, and we can even tap our mountains to pay for any other colors in the mana cost of that spell, so we don't actually have to use our treasure tokens for it. Grenzo, Havoc Razor. Whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we get to choose one of 2 options. The first option allows us to goad target creature that opponent controls. Goad basically means that creature has to attack next turn and it has to attack a player other than us. Goad can really set up for some interesting political plays. For example, if you're playing against a Kaglov player and they really want to hold their commander back and don't swing with it because there are like 10 creatures on the board that can block it, we can just goad it, make it swing into one of our opponent's big creatures and they will lose their commander. And the second ability, and the real reason why we play it, is whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, we get to exile the top card of that player's library and we can cast it until the end of turn. And we can also spend mana as though it was any color, so we can actually tap our mountains. opponents for it. Since the entire purpose of this deck is connecting to opponents with as many creatures as possible, Grenzo will always provide you with some insane benefits. And his second ability scales perfectly with Vaan, because we will be exiling a ton of cards from our opponents and we are able to cast them. When we do, our army of scouts, pirates and rogues will just keep on growing. And Grenzo also is a rogue himself, so whenever we swing with him, he will trigger himself and he will give us a Vaan trigger. Party Treasure, a 2-mana, 1/4 lizard wizard. Any non-creature spell we cast from exile will have Convoke. Convoke means we can tap creatures as we are casting a spell from exile and they will help paying for the mana cost. Whenever we tap a creature for Convoke, it will reduce the cost of the spell by 1 generic mana or 1 mana in that creature's colors. As you can imagine, in this deck we will always be controlling a ton of creatures, so we can basically cast some spells for free thanks to the Convoke mechanic. If we are casting our own cards from exile by using junk tokens, for example, this card's effect will also apply to those. At the beginning of our first main phase, we get the option to discard a card. When we do, we exile the top 2 cards of our library and choose one of them. Then, until the end of turn, we are allowed to play the chosen card from exile, giving us some sort of card advantage and also giving us the benefit that we can actually use our creatures to convoke this spell. Party Treasure is a really strong lizard wizard. Robber of the Rich, a 2-mana 2/2 creature with reach and haste. I suppose they gave this creature reach because it is an archer. Whenever this creature attacks an opponent and the opponent has more cards in hand than we do, we get to exile the top card of their library. Then we are allowed to cast that card from exile any turn we attacked with a rogue. Since we don't play that much card draw in this deck and we gain card advantage by exiling our own cards, we will always have a low number of cards in our hand. So Robber of the Rich will always be exiling cards from the top of our opponent's library. Even if Robber of the Rich would leave the battlefield and we attack with another rogue we control, we can still cast the exiled card. Robber of the Rich doesn't have to be on the battlefield for this to happen. Share the Spoils. This is one of the weirdest cards in the deck and it will turn your game into absolute chaos. Whenever this 2-mana enchantment enters the battlefield or whenever a player loses the game, each player exiles the top card of their library. During each player's turn, that player may play a land card or cast a spell from any of the cards exiled with Share the Spoils. When a player casts a spell or plays a land, by the effect of this card, they have to exile the top card of their library, adding it to the Share the Spoils pile. Where should I even start with this card? When it enters the battlefield, each player exiles the top card of their library, so there will be a total of 4 cards exiled by Share the Spoils. Let's assume we have a forest, a mountain, a murder, and a Kerenko exiled by it. Then we pass the turn to our opponent and they decide to play the mountain from the pile. All fine and dandy, the mountain enters the battlefield under their control and they have to exile the top card of their library. Let's say they exile a Birds of Paradise. They then pass the turn to opponent 2, and opponent 2 really likes Bird of Paradise and he wants one of his own. So they decide to tap 1 mana and cast the Birds of Paradise from the pile of Share the Spoils. Enters the battlefield and they then have to exile the top card of their library. Let's say they exile a Lightning Bolt. Then they pass to opponent 3 and opponent 3 really doesn't like opponent 2 having a Birds of Paradise. So they then tap 1 mana, they cast the Lightning Bolt from exile and they destroy the bird, exiling the top card of their library, adding 1 additional card to the exile pile. Share the Spoils basically allows any player to cast any of the exiled cards and it just keeps on going, and this will turn the game into absolute chaos because every single opponent will be able to cast 1 card from the pile of cards exiled under this card every single turn. So each player will have access to anyone's cards. Really chaotic, but since we do play a Vaan deck, we will usually get the most benefit out of this. Since every time we cast a spell we don't own, we get to buff our entire board with +1/+1 counters, and we do play a ton of cards that benefit us whenever we cast cards from exile. So we will usually get the biggest benefit of casting cards from Share the Spoils. And honestly, it's just a really fun and unique card that will ensure you have a good time with your friends and you will all have a good laugh. Light Up the Stage, a 3-mana card that allows us to exile the top 2 cards of our library and we can play them until the end of our next turn. So you don't have to play them this turn, you will just have access to those 2 cards until the end of your next turn. Paying 3 mana for this type of effect might be a little too much. But it also has the spectacle mechanic, meaning we can cast this card for its spectacle cost, 1 red mana, if an opponent lost life this turn. So you can just swing with your creatures. If you do deal damage to an opponent, you can cast a spell in your second main phase for just 1 mana, and the next turn you will have those 2 cards in exile you can even play from there. Getting some sort of a 2-card card advantage spell for just 1 mana is a really good deal. And it will also trigger all the cast from exile effects we play in this deck. Impending Flux. This 3 mana card will deal damage to each opponent and each creature they control equal to the number of cards we've cast this turn from anywhere other than our hand. This means casting cards from our Vaan triggers, casting cards from our own exile or an opponent's exile, or even flashbacking cards, since they are cast from the graveyard and not our hand. If you, for example, can cast 4 cards from exile in a single turn, you will get a 3 mana spell that deals damage to each creature an opponent controls and each opponent, which is a really solid deal, especially since we'll be casting a ton of cards from exile anyways. The entire deck is built around this. This card also has the foretell mechanic, meaning whenever it is in our hand, we can pay 2 generic mana and exile it face down. Then at any later turn, so not the turn you actually foretold it, you can pay 3 mana to cast it from exile. When we choose to do so, it will count itself for its own effect. So baseline, you will already have cast 1 spell from exile if you use the foretell mechanic. In this type of deck, this card just basically functions as a one-sided board wipe. It does require some setup, but the setup is actually doing what this deck wants to do anyways. Wild Wasteland. This 3 mana enchantment will make us skip our draw step. So for as long as this card is on the battlefield, we won't be drawing any cards anymore. Yeah, I know, that sounds pretty bad. But at the beginning of our upkeep, we get to exile the top 2 cards of our library and we are allowed to cast those this turn. This is a really weird card to play, since basically every single turn you will be semi-drawing 2 cards, but if you don't play them this turn because you don't have the mana or it are 2 lands and you can only play 1 of them, you will lose the cards in exile at the end of your turn. It's quite a risky card that can turn out quite nicely, especially in the late game, but since we do play this many cards that benefit from us playing cards from exile, it's actually a fantastic fit for the deck. You can view this card as some sort of a mono-red version of the classic card Phyrexian Altar, allowing you to draw an additional card, be it in exile, every single turn. Breaches. Brazen Plunderer. A 4 mana 3/3 pirate with menace. Whenever 1 or more pirates deal combat damage to an opponent, we get to exile the top card of that player's library. Then, until the end of our turn, we are allowed to cast that card, and we can spend mana as though it was any color. This card basically has the same effect as Vaan does, but only for pirates. As I mentioned before, we do play 10 pirates in the deck, and if you can just get any additional triggers on breaches, it is an insanely valuable effect, giving us access to our opponent's spells and lands and allowing us, when we cast it, to put a ton of +1/+1 counters on our entire board with Vaan. And since it is a pirate himself and he does have menace, he's actually a fantastic creature to swing with and trigger himself and give us additional Vaan triggers. Ensnared by the Maga, a 4 mana sorcery speed spell that will give every opponent a villainous choice when we cast it, meaning every opponent gets to choose 1 of 2 actions they have to do. Option 1 makes them exile the top cards of their library until they hit a non-land card. Then we are allowed to cast the hit card for free. Or they have to exile the top 4 cards of their library, and then that opponent will lose life equal to the total combined mana cost of those cards. This is just a really fun card to use, but is also really strong. It does have a huge randomness factor, since for the first effect, if they keep exiling cards and they hit like an Arbor Elf or something, we can just cast it for free. We will get a Vaan trigger, but it's not really that big of a threat to hit. But if they do manage to hit something big like a Blightsteel Colossus, for example, we just got a Blightsteel Colossus. Or let's say you play against a reanimation player and they choose the second effect and they exile the top 4 cards and they hit like an Elesh Norn, a Griselbrand, whatever, they will take a huge amount of damage and those cards will be exiled. And remember, this effect is for each opponent, so you will always gain a ton of value by just casting this for 4 mana. This is by far one of the most fun cards to use in the deck. Ignite the Future, a 4 mana spell that allows us to exile the top 3 cards of our library, and we are allowed to play those until the end of our next turn. You can basically see this as some sort of an investment. You pay 4 mana and next turn you have access to 3 additional cards. This card also has the flashback mechanic for 8 mana, meaning we can cast it from our graveyard for the flashback cost. When we do so, we also get to exile the top 3 cards cards of our library, but we are allowed to cast all of them for free. Both functions as a card that gives us card advantage in the mid stages of the game, and later in the game, if you can flashback it, you can just hit some huge creatures in your deck and put them into play directly from Exile. And like I said, if you flashback a card, you don't cast it from your hand and you will trigger a ton of other cards. Like for example, the next card, Iraxa, Empress to Mars. For 4 mana, you get a 5/4 trample creature with the battlecry mechanic, meaning whenever you attack with this creature, all other attacking creatures you control will get +1/0, really upping the aggression in this deck. But the main reason why we play this is whenever we cast a card from anywhere other than our hand, we get to create a 2/2 warrior token. So anytime we cast a spell that's exiled by Vaan, any of our theft cards, we flashback a card, we cast a card from our own exile, we will get a 2/2 warrior token. These tokens will overwhelm the board, especially if you can swing with them. With this card, they will all get +1/0 thanks to the battlecry mechanic. Iraxa can really win games on her own. Sadly, these cards are red alien warrior creatures and they're not scouts, rogues or pirates, so you won't get any Vaan triggers of these tokens. Maybe it's better because it would be totally broken if they were actually like pirates or something. Mysterious Stranger, a 4 mana 3/2 rogue with flash, meaning we can cast it on instant speed. Whenever he enters the battlefield, we get to choose one instant or sorcery card for each graveyard and then exile all of those cards. If 2 or more cards are exiled this way, we get to choose one at random and we can cast it without paying the mana cost. Due to the wording of this card, you can't just choose one card you'd like, you actually have to choose one per graveyard. So if every opponent has one card in their graveyard that is a legal target for the spell, you will have to exile them and the target will be chosen at random. That being said, a flash 3/2 rogue body, which already is really good in this deck, with this effect and giving you access to a free stolen card will always be really good. Mazio Mugger, a 5 mana 3/3 rogue creature. Whenever this creature attacks, we get to exile the top card of each player's library. We then are allowed to cast those cards until the end of this turn and we can spend mana as though it was any color. So this card basically gives us some sort of a Vaan trigger whenever it attacks. It doesn't even have to deal combat damage. Pretty solid card, but at 5 mana it's not really worth it. We play it because it also has the blitz mechanic for only 3 mana. If we pay the blitz cost, we can just put this on the battlefield for only 3 mana. It will gain haste, and whenever this creature dies, we get to draw a card. We do have to sacrifice it at the beginning of our end step. 90% of the time, we will just be blitzing this in for 3 mana, getting the awesome trigger, exiling cards from everyone that we are then able to cast. And if we do have Vaan on the field and this creature actually connects, we do get some additional value in the form of an extra Vaan trigger. Then if it dies in combat or we have to sacrifice it, we do get to draw a card and it will just replace itself. Stolen Strategy, a 5 mana enchantment that is the absolute dream card of any sort of theft deck. At the beginning of our upkeep, we get to exile the top card of every opponent's library. Then until the end of turn, we can cast that card and we can spend mana as though it was any color. So basically every upkeep you will gain access to your opponent's resources and you can even tap your mountains to cast them. Whenever you do, you will get a Vaan trigger and all the exile synergy cards in this deck will also trigger. If this card can stick to the battlefield for a couple of turns, it will generate you some insane value. Etali, Primal Storm. Yeah, you knew this card was gonna be in the deck. It's probably one of the most well-known theft cards in the entire Commander format. For 6 mana, you get a 6/6 Elder Dinosaur creature. Whenever Etali attacks, every player exiles the top card of their library and we then are allowed to cast it without paying the mana cost. This is by far the craziest attack trigger in the deck, because every time you attack with Etali, you will generate an immense amount of value. Even if you just exile some small cards like a Sol Ring, a Farseek, I don't know, you will just get those cards for free. And let's say you attack and one opponent exiles a land which you can't do anything with, and you get to cast 3 additional spells for free from exile from your opponents, you will also gain 3 Vaan triggers, putting 3 +1/1 counters on every single rogue, pirate or scout you control. The value you'll get whenever you attack with Etali is just insane. Nalfeshni, or however you pronounce this card. It's a 6 mana 4/6 flying demon. Whenever we cast any card from any exile, no matter what the source is, we get to copy that spell. If the copied spell is a permanent card, a planeswalker, enchantment, creature, artifact, whatever, it does gain an additional line of text. At the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this permanent, and the permanent will also get haste until the end of turn. If you have Selesnya on the battlefield and you start exiling some cards, you will just gain double the value from them if you cast them. You stole a murder and you decide to cast it, you can now destroy 2 target creatures. You stole a Kodama's Reach and you cast it, you now get to put 2 lands into play and 2 into your hand. You stole a Blightsteel Colossus, you now get 2 Blightsteel Colossi and 1 will have haste, so you can instantly take 2 opponents out of the game. Selesnya is just a perfect support card for this type of deck. Flaming Tyrannosaurus. Before making this deck, I didn't even know this card existed, but it's a real powerhouse. For 7 mana, you get a 5/5 dinosaur with menace. And it also has the craziest effect for any cost from exile strategies that I've ever seen. Whenever this is on the battlefield and we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, this card will deal 3 damage to any target, and it will then gain a +1/+1 counter. So whenever we cast something from exile or we flashback a card, we will get a free lightning bolt spell, which is just insane. You can just start pinging things on the board, you can start taking down opponents' life totals. I don't know how to emphasize this, the value on this is just beyond crazy. And on top of that, its body will also keep growing with +1/+1 counters. Thanks to the menace, it's easy to get hits in with this creature and you can actually start taking opponents out of the game with this. If you thought that was crazy, it even has a second ability. Whenever Flaming Tyrannosaurus dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. Yeah, let that sink in. It's a creature body that keeps growing whenever we cast a spell from exile, which we will be doing a lot. And if your opponents finally do manage to deal with it and remove it, each opponent will just take an immense amount of damage. By far the best card in the deck, the ultimate curve topper. And the last card in this section is one of the rooms from the Duskmourn set, Charred Foyer and Warped Space. The left side of this card is a 4 mana enchantment that allows us every single one of our turns to exile the top card of our deck, and we can play it until the end of our turn, granting us some sort of a card advantage. If this room is on the battlefield, we can also pay 6 mana to unlock the other side of the room. Once per turn, we are allowed to pay 0 mana instead of paying the cost of any card we cast from exile. As you've seen by now in this video, we will be casting a card from exile every single turn. This card just allows us to cast the first card for free, which is absolutely insane value. And obviously, both sides of this room interact really well with each other. At the beginning of your upkeep, let's say you exile a Flaming Tyrannosaurus off top. If you have unlocked the other side of this card, you can just cast that card for 0 mana. Crazy value. Next up, we have the treasure and ramp support. Every time we don't cast a spell with Vaan's trigger, we will get treasure tokens. And cards in this section make sure those tokens are never wasted. We've got cards that ramp our mana, make even more treasures, or reward us for actually using the treasure tokens in this deck. Beatdown Beatstick. It's a 1 mana equipment card that we can equip to any creature for 2 mana. The equipped creature will get +1/0 and menace, so a slight little stat boost, and the menace actually makes it harder to block that creature and will give us more chances to get Vaan triggers. Whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, we also get to generate a treasure token, so basically ramping our mana. A fun little equipment that synergizes really well with what we want to do in this deck. Swing and generate treasures. Impulsive Pilfer, a 1 mana 1/1 goblin pirate. Whenever this creature dies, we get to generate a treasure token. This creature really is the best start you can have on turn 1, since your opponents really can't win in this situation. Or you have a pirate, they don't block and will give you free Vaan triggers, or they do decide to block it and he will give you mana by generating you a treasure token. And if this card is blocked and it goes to your graveyard, you can cast it later for 4 mana using the Encore mechanic. When we do use the Encore mechanic, we get 1 copy of this creature per opponent in the game. Usually you will get 3 copies of this creature and they all have to attack at your opponents. And once again, if they don't decide to block this creature, it is a pirate, so you will get 3 Vaan triggers. Or if they do decide to block it, it will translate into insane acceleration by generating you treasure tokens. Fantastic 1-drop for this deck. Obviously, we do play a Soul Ring since this allows us to get Vaan out really early, and we can also always use the colorless mana to cast any of the stolen cards, especially if we do have cards that say we can spend mana as though it was any color. Sticky Fingers, a 1-mana enchant creature spell. The enchanted creature will gain menace, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, we get to create a treasure token. Another awesome way to buff up the creatures we already want to attack with, somewhat similar to Beatdown Beatstick. And I know if a creature with an aura attached to it gets removed or just gets blocked in combat, it's a really bad feeling because you will lose 2 cards instead of 1. But whenever Sticky Fingers leaves the battlefield, we get to draw a card. So it basically replaces itself. There's really no reason not to play this card. Strike It Rich. This 1-mana sorcery will just generate us a treasure token. And for 3 mana, we can flashback it and also generate a treasure token. It's a really simple spell that just allows us to accelerate our mana by 1 turn. And if we flashback it, we actually didn't cast it from our hand, so it will trigger cards like Flaming Tyrannosaurus. Really simple, but really good card. Felwarstone, a 2-mana mana rock that taps for any color of mana that a land or opponent's control can produce. As mentioned before in the video, we do actually need the colors of our opponents to cast any of their spells, because Vaan doesn't say use mana as though it was any color, so we actually have to use treasure tokens to cast stolen spells if they're not red. Felwarstone will just accelerate our mana and give us access to any colors our opponents can produce. Generous Plunderer, a 2-mana 2/2 rogue with menace, making it a fantastic body for this deck. A rogue that's pretty hard to block. Perfect card to trigger Vaan's first ability. At the beginning of our upkeep, we are allowed to create a treasure token. If we choose to do so, target opponent also creates a treasure token. So this card will basically ramp our mana, give us access to colors thanks to our treasures, but at the cost of also ramping one of our opponents. Since we are a treasure deck, usually we will be able to leverage those treasure tokens better than any of our opponents. So you will gain the most benefit out of this effect. Whenever Generous Plunderer attacks, it deals damage to the defending player equal to the amount of artifacts they control. In most cases, he will just deal an additional 2 or 3 damage if you play against a ramp player that has Soul Rings, Mana Rocks, whatever. But if you play against a token player that, for example, controls 10 treasures, 10 clue tokens, 10 food tokens, can sometimes deal huge hits that are like 20-30 damage. Or if you have an artifact player in your pot, they will absolutely hate you for playing this card. Prompto Argentum, a 2-mana 2/1 scout with haste, meaning he does trigger Vaan whenever he deals combat damage. Whenever we cast any non-creature spell and at least 4 mana was spent to cast it, we get to create a treasure token. In our own deck, we do play some non-creature cards that cost more than 4 mana, so he will generate us treasure tokens. Just another fantastic body to trigger Vaan with and generate you some extra treasures. Academy Manufacturer, a 3-mana artifact creature that's just made for any deck that creates clue, food, or treasure tokens. Whenever you would generate one of those 3 types of tokens, you get to generate all 3 instead. So every treasure we generate with Vaan or any other source will also give us access to a food and a clue token. The clue tokens are really awesome cards later in the game to actually start drawing some cards when you run out of gas. And if you are under a ton of pressure and you desperately need some life, you can just start sacrificing food tokens to up your life total. Crime Novelist, a 3-mana 1/3 goblin bard. His ability is really simple. Whenever we sacrifice an artifact, we get to add 1 red mana to our mana pool, and this creature will get a +1/+1 counter. This card is absolutely crazy if you have any sort of treasure tokens on the board, because every treasure you sacrifice will now give you 2 mana, and it will also grow this creature's body. If you, for example, have 3 treasure tokens on the battlefield, you then play this creature, they will now generate you a whopping 6 mana instead of 3. And this creature will also turn into a 4/6 body. So a card that ramps your mana like crazy and is a huge growing body that your opponents will have to deal with as soon as possible. Professional Facebreaker, a classic 3-mana 2/3 card with menace. And he functions somewhat in the same way as Vaan does. Whenever 1 or more creatures deal combat damage to an opponent, we get to generate a treasure token. Since it does say 1 or more opponents, this really promotes swinging our creatures as much different opponents as possible to generate us multiple treasure tokens. This card rewards us with additional treasure tokens for doing what this deck already wants to do: deal combat damage to opponents. And on top of that, it also has an awesome activated ability. we can sacrifice a treasure token to exile the top card of our library. We then are allowed to cast it until the end of turn, giving us some awesome card advantage, just allowing us to exile our treasures when we don't need them anymore and we desperately need some cards off the top of our deck. And obviously, whenever we cast these cards from exile, they will trigger all the other cards in this deck that synergize with this effect. This card really is a must-have card in the deck. Captain Lenary's Storm, a 3-mana 2/2 pirate with haste. Whenever this card attacks, we get to generate a treasure token. And on top of that, whenever we sacrifice a treasure token, this card will also gain +1/0 until the end of turn. In this deck, we will be generating and using treasure tokens a lot, be it to cast our own spell or an opponent's spells. Captain Lenary's Storm's power will grow until the end of turn and you will be able to deal a ton of damage. And this card even got an alternate art version in the Final Fantasy series, which is also Vaan. Personally, I don't really like these special Final Fantasy screenshot type of art cards. Let me know in the comment section below if you actually like this type of card. Big Score, a 4-mana instant speed spell that has the additional cost of discarding a card. Whenever we cast this card, we get to draw 2 cards and generate 2 treasure tokens. A really simple card that actually helps us ramp our mana, generate treasure tokens, and allows us to draw some additional cards. We will be generating a ton of card advantage by exiling cards off the top, but we do need some form of actual card draw in this deck. And the last card in this section is Reign of Riches. It's a 5-mana enchantment that whenever it enters the battlefield generates us 2 treasure tokens. The first spell we cast each turn that mana from a treasure token was spent on will gain Cascade. Cascade basically means whenever we cast a spell that costs 6 mana, for example, we get to exile the top cards of our library until we hit a non-land card with lower mana value than that card, and then we get to cast that spell without paying its mana cost. Cascading actually also casts cards from exile and they will trigger all of the exile synergies in this deck. Reign of Riches is a really awesome enchantment to have on the battlefield later in the game. If you really enjoy these hyper budget decks that are built on a budget of less than 50 euros, I have 2 more awesome decks like this one on the channel that you totally want to check out. I have a 25 euro Jolly Balloon Man deck that relies on creating a ton of balloons and just winning on ETB triggers. And I've also recently made an Ellivere 50 euro budget list that you totally want to check out. It's some sort of an enchantment beatdown deck that's really, really potent for its price tag. One of my favorite decks I've ever made for the channel. If you want to check it out, both videos are linked in the description below the video. Next up, we have the interaction and utility section. In this section, you'll find removal, protection, and cards that support the synergies in this deck perfectly, but didn't fit into any other categories. Great Train Heist, a 1-mana spell from the Outlaws of Thunder Junction set. This card has the spree mechanic, meaning in addition to paying the 1 mana, we get to pay any of the costs of any of the options on this card. Then when resolving, this card will have the effects of the options we paid for. The first option for 3 additional mana allows us to untap all our creatures and we will get an additional combat phase. So an additional opportunity to swing and deal damage to your opponents and to get additional Vaan triggers. The second option for 2 additional mana will give all our creatures +1/0 and first strike until the end of turn, allowing us to buff our board with a slight little power boost, and the first strike will allow our creatures to deal damage first so they actually might survive combat. Since everything will gain first strike, everything will deal damage in the first strike damage step and we won't get any additional Vaan triggers. Because we can give first strike to some specific creature, they will all get it. And the last option for 1 additional mana, whenever a creature deals combat damage to a chosen opponent, we get to generate a tapped treasure token for each creature that dealt damage to them. If you are about to swing in with 5 creatures and you know they will connect to an opponent, you can just play this card and you will gain an immense amount of treasures. The fact that you can cast this card on instant speed and choose any of the modes is just crazy. All 3 of the options are very solid. And if you don't have the mana to pay for all 3 of these, you can just pick the option you need most at that time in the game and you will always surprise your opponents and totally blow them out. This honestly is one of my favorite red cards ever printed. Lightning Bolt. 1 mana, 3 damage, any target. Auto inclusion in any red deck. Play your removal, people. Mizzium Mortars. This 2 mana sorcery speed spell allows us to deal 4 damage to any target creature we don't control, acting as a really solid removal spell since most creatures will have 4 or lower toughness. And it also has the overload mechanic, meaning if we pay 6 mana mana for this spell, it will deal 4 damage to each creature we don't control. In most cases, when you overload this functions as a one-sided board wipe. We will be generating a ton of treasure tokens in this deck, so 6 mana actually isn't that much to pay for. Power Balance, a 2 mana enchantment with a really unique effect. Whenever any opponent casts any spell, we get to reveal the top card of our library. If the top card of our deck and the cast spell have the same mana cost, we get to cast that card for free. So let's say you have this on the board, an opponent plays a Farseek, we flip a Mizzium Mortars off the top, we will be able to play the Mizzium Mortars for free. This card is really random, but we do play a ton of really cheap spells, somewhere between 1 to 3 mana. And opponents will always do the same, be it cheap ramp spells, cheap artifacts, cheap mana rocks, so the chances of you actually getting triggers of this are pretty big. In a game of Commander where you have 3 opponents, cards like Power Balance will always be fantastic. And if you do manage to cast any card with Power Balance from the top, it will trigger any effect that says cast from anywhere other than your hand. Swift Foot Boots, a 2 mana equipment we can equip for 1 mana, and the equipped creature will gain hexproof and haste. In this deck, this card serves 2 purposes. First purpose is equipping this to Vaan or any of our other value creatures. The card will gain hexproof, so your opponents won't be able to use any spot removal or abilities to actually deal with this card. The second use of this card is actually just playing big creatures, giving them haste, and we are instantly able to swing with them. Swiftfoot Boots is a classic and really simple card you can play in almost any deck. Untimely Malfunction, a 2 mana instant speed spell with 3 fantastic options. We can destroy target artifact, we can change the target of a spell or ability with 1 single target, or 1 or 2 creatures can't block this turn. So in a nutshell, this card allows us to deal with any problematic artifacts on the battlefield. If someone uses spot removal on our commander or an ability we don't like, we can just redirect it to something else. And if an opponent has a board full of blockers and you really want to swing in with your scouts, rogues and pirates, you can just make sure those creatures can block and you will get combat damage through. What makes this card fantastic is its versatility. You will always be able to use one of its options. You Find Some Prisoners, a 2 mana instant speed spell with 2 options. Allows us to deal with any artifact on the battlefield, or it acts as some sort of a theft card. We can exile 3 cards of target opponent's library and then choose one of them. Until our next turn, we are able to cast the chosen card. And we can also spend mana as though it was any color, so we don't actually have to use our treasure tokens for it. Agility Bobblehead, a 3 mana rock that taps for mana of any color, actually helping us cast spells outside of our mono-red color identity that we stole with Vaan. For 3 mana and tapping it, we can give one of our creatures can be blocked and haste until the end of turn. Later in the game, if your opponents do have a ton of blockers and you really want to get some damage in to get some Vaan triggers, we do need unblockable cards like this one. Since when you can't swing anymore, Vaan just doesn't work anymore. And later in the game, giving any of the creatures you just played haste and you're instantly able to swing with them might actually change the outcome of the game. Chaos Warp, a 3 mana instant speed spell that deals with just about anything. We get to target a permanent and the owner of that permanent shuffles it into their library, and then they keep flipping cards of their deck until they hit a non-land permanent. Then they get to put that permanent into play. In this deck, this usually will act as some sort of a removal spell. If an opponent has a Field of the Dead, you can just make it shuffle in their library, they will get a new permanent. If they control an indestructible Mondrak, you can just reshuffle it into their library, give them a new permanent. You don't want to be Chaos Warping a 1/1 squirrel, since the outcome of the card will always be better. But usually if you have a really big threat on the board, just make it shuffle in their library, they will always get a worse permanent. Or later in the game, if you're really desperate, you can just Chaos Warp one of your own mountains, for example. You will get to flip permanents off the top and put one into play. It's a real Hail Mary, but if you get lucky, you get a Flaming Tyrannosaurus and you can just start rebuilding and winning the game from there. Sundering Eruption, a 3 mana MDFC land. When you cast this, you get to destroy target land. Then the owner of that land gets to search their library for a basic land and gets to put it into play tapped. So it functions as some sort of simple land removal if you do play in a pot where people play things like Field of the Dead, Glacial Chasm, Cabal Coffers even. But the main reason why we play this is because it also says at the end of the text, creatures without flying can't block this turn. So if your opponent has an army of 7 million 1/1 goblin tokens, you can just play this card, and as long as those creatures don't have flying, opponents just can't block anymore this turn. Meaning you can send your armies of scouts, pirates and rogues to every single player and you will get a ton of Vaan triggers. And if you don't need this effect or you desperately need a land, you can just play the backside, which is a land that taps for red mana, and if you pay 3 life when it enters, you can even make it enter untapped, making it function as some sort of a basic mountain. There's really no downside to playing any of these MDFC lands. Go! Mysterious Mime. It's a 4 mana 2/2 wizard from the Final Fantasy set, and it's honestly turning into one of my favorite cards real quick. At the beginning of combat, on our turn, we may have Gogo transform into a copy of any other creature we control, except its name will still be Gogo. This basically means we can copy legendary creatures, because the legend rule will not apply because both cards will have a different name. If we do, both Gogo and that creature will both get +2/0 and haste until the end of turn. This effect is just insane. Let's say, for example, on turn 3 you control Vaan. Then it's turn 4 and you decide to play a Gogo. Then you go to combat and Gogo will trigger. You target Vaan and now Gogo will become a copy of Vaan, so you will get the same abilities. You will get +2/0 and haste. Then you will be able to swing with Vaan, Gogo, and any other creatures you control. Whenever you then deal damage with a rogue, scout, or pirate, you will get 2 triggers, because now you have 2 copies of Vaan on the battlefield. The fact that both cards get haste and instantly allow you to swing with whatever Gogo copied is just crazy. And this is just giving an example with Vaan. Let's say you use Gogo to copy a Tali, for example. Yeah, I know, the value will be crazy. Rose, Cutthroat Raider, a 4 mana 3/2 first strike robot. At the end of combat, if we attacked with a creature this turn, the raid mechanic will trigger, and we get to create 1 junk token for each opponent we attacked. As you know by now, we want to be swinging at as much opponents as possible at all times to get as much Vaan triggers as possible, so this synergizes with what we already want to do perfectly. And the junk tokens will generate us card advantage, and we are able to cast cards from Exile, which will also generate us value. And probably the most relevant line of text on Rose is, whenever we sacrifice a junk token, we get to add 1 red mana to our mana pool. This turns our junk tokens into absolute value machines. Any of the cards in this deck that already generate junk tokens will just be pushed over the top value-wise if you can also manage to play Rose. The Fire Crystal, one of the legendary monocolored artifacts from the Final Fantasy set. It's a 4 mana artifact that will reduce the cost of any red spells we play by 1 generic mana. Since we are a mono red deck, this applies to any card we play. Passively, it will also give all the creatures we control haste. Pretty good in an aggressive deck that always wants to be swinging. And for 6 mana and tapping it, we get to create a token copy of a creature we control and give it haste. We do have to sacrifice the token copy at the beginning of the next end step. With this card later in the game, if we do have a ton of mana around, we can just start copying any of our scouts, pirates, or rogues, and we can be swinging with some additional creature bodies. I've never played this card in any deck before, so I have to test out how good it is, but I can imagine the value on this is quite good, especially the first 2 passive abilities. Gauntlet of Power, 5 mana artifact that makes us choose a color whenever it enters the battlefield. Obviously, in this deck, we will be choosing red. All creatures of the chosen color will get +1/+1. Since we are an aggressive deck and we will be going white on our board, this little power boost might actually be really relevant. Do be warned though, it doesn't say creatures we control. It actually will boost the power and toughness of all red creatures on the board by 1, even the ones your opponents control. Whenever a basic land of the chosen color is tapped for mana, it will produce 2 mana instead. This means all our mountains will now produce 2 mana, doubling our mana output. Like with the previous ability, do be warned, it doesn't say lands you control. So if your opponents do control some basic mountains, it will also make them tap for 2 mana. That being said, nowadays in Commander, everyone is playing multicolored cards and almost no one is playing a mono red deck. So the chances of your opponents using this against you are actually really small. Gauntlet of Power is a really potent card, especially for monocolored decks that play a ton of basic lands. And the last card in this section is a Volcanic Torrent. It's a 5 mana sorcery speed spell with the Cascade mechanic. Volcanic Torrent will deal X damage to each creature and planeswalker your opponents control, X being the amount of spells you've cast this turn. There is a weird little thing about the Cascade mechanic. If you cast a Volcanic Torrent, the Cascade will trigger first and any spell you cascade into will actually be cast before Volcanic Torrent. Then Volcanic Torrent also counts itself when cast, so Volcanic Torrent Torrent will always baseline deal 2 damage to each creature and planeswalker your opponents control. If you're then able to cast even more spells before you cast this will just result in a massive damage one-sided board wipe that just clears the board of any creatures, then allowing you to swing in on an empty board with your army of scouts, rogues and pirates and deal a ton of damage and get a ton of triggers. Another really fantastic one-sided board wipe in this deck. Next up we have the lands. We are in mono red and we are a hyper budget deck, so this means we do play a ton of basic lands. I did manage to find a couple of utility lands, so I will be going over those first. Exotic Orchard. Whenever we tap this land, we get to add 1 mana to our mana pool of any type lands our opponent's control can produce. Now why would we play this in a mono red deck? It's simple. When we do steal cards with Vaan, we actually need to be able to generate a color outside of our mono red color combination. Let's say we exile a card with Vaan with 3 black mana pips in the mana cost. We do need 3 treasure tokens because we can't use our mountains to actually cast a card. If that opponent does control a swamp, Exotic Orchard will tap for black mana and we will be able to cast the spell. Pretty niche land in the deck, but later in the game it might help you with the color fixing. Access Tunnel. A land that taps for colorless mana, and for 3 mana and tapping it, we can make target creature with power 3 or less unblockable until the end of turn. Later in the game, if your opponents have a really solid board of blockers and you just can't get any combat damage through to get some Vaan triggers, this card will ensure one of your creatures will connect and you will be able to get some triggers. Scavenger Grounds. A land that taps for a colorless mana, for 2 mana, tapping it and sacrificing it, we also get to exile all graveyards. Nowadays, in modern day Magic, a ton of decks win by using their graveyard. Be it a landfall deck, a spellslinger deck that wants to flash back spells, or even a reanimation deck that wants to reanimate a big Elesh Norn and take over the game that way. Playing a simple land like this might actually win you some games. Spine Rock Null. A land that enters the battlefield tapped and will tap for 1 red mana. It does have the hideaway mechanic, meaning whenever it enters the battlefield, we get to look at the top 4 cards of our library, exile one of those cards, and the rest goes back to the bottom of our library. If an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage this turn, we get to pay 1 red mana, tap this card, and then we get to exile the hideaway card for free. The 7 damage doesn't even have to be dealt by us. If opponents are just fighting each other and an opponent loses 7 life for some reason, just pay 1 red mana, tap this land, and you get to cast your card for free. Just imagine having a flaming Tyrannosaurus under this card and actually being able to cast it for just 1 mana. Absolutely crazy. And if you cast a card this way, it's also cast from exile and will trigger any of the synergies with that in this deck. And for basics, we play 29 mountains. And last up, I also have a lengthy upgrade section. Since this deck was built on a €50 hyper budget, it does have a lot of room to grow. If you don't care about the budget, these are the cards I'd purchase and include in the deck. Ragavan, Nimble, Pilfer. Surprise, surprise. Everyone knew this card was going to be in the upgrade section. The price of this card is half of what the price of the entire deck is. It's a 1 mana 2/1 monkey pirate creature. Whenever Ragavan deals combat damage to a player, we get to generate a treasure token and we get to exile the top card of that opponent's library. Until the end of turn, we're also allowed to cast this card. Yeah, what can I say? It's a 1-drop that's insane in any deck you put it in because it will just generate you a ton of mana with the treasure tokens whenever you connect with it, and especially in this deck because it is a pirate, it will give us Vaan triggers and it plays perfectly into the theft synergies we play in this deck. For 2 mana, it also has the dash mechanic, meaning if this is in our hand, we can pay 2 mana, we'll enter the battlefield with haste, so we will be able to swing with it. At the end of combat, it will return to our hand. Ragavan is just one of the best 1-drops ever printed. Dolmen Gate, a 2 mana artifact with a really awesome passive ability. We get to prevent all damage that would be dealt to any attacking creature we control. Later in the game, if your opponents do have a huge amount of blockers and you actually can't swing anymore with your rogues and pirates, if you do control a Dolmen Gate, you can just swing with all your creatures, hope a few of them connect, and the creatures that are blocked will always survive combat, so you won't lose any board presence to it. A really simple card, but it will prevent a ton of your creatures from being destroyed. Ruby Medallion. Since we are a mono red deck, this is an auto inclusion in the deck. It's a 2 mana artifact that reduces the cost of any red spell we cast by 1 generic mana. But it does have a quite high price tag and I couldn't include it in the budget. Honestly, if I were to upgrade the deck, this is the first card I'd include. The effect is just that good in a monocolored deck. Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon. These 2 cards have the same effects. One is an enchantment and one is a creature. All non-basic lands are mountains. Period. it. This is a really short line of text, but the impact on the game is oh so big. As I mentioned earlier in the video, nobody nowadays is playing monocolor decks. Everyone is playing 2, 3, 4, 5 color commander decks, and no one is playing basic lands. Most decks nowadays only have like 4 basic lands. If you do manage to drop a Blood Moon on turn 3 and your opponents only control non-basic lands and they're not in the red color identity, they just can't generate any colored mana with their lands anymore, since their non-basic lands will only tap for colorless mana. If you do decide to play Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon in this type of deck, they will win you a ton of games, which is absolutely crazy for just 3-drop cards. But if you include them, your friends will not invite you to game nights anymore, since if you do play a Blood Moon, the game's just over for any opponent. So to summarize, if you want to win games, include these cards. If you want to keep your friends, don't play these cards. Xorin, a 3-mana elemental creature that's basically just a perfect fit for any treasure-based deck. Whenever you would create one or more treasures under your control, you get to generate an additional treasure on top of that. As you've seen in the video, we will be generating a ton of treasure tokens, be it thanks to Vaan or any of the other cards we play. If you do have Xorin on the battlefield, you will just be generating double the amount of treasure tokens. Originally, this card was in the main deck list, but I had to cut it to fit the €50 budget. Honestly, it's not really that expensive of a card, so you can just purchase one, include it into the deck, and it will already be a ton better. Wild Magic Sorcerer, a 4-mana creature that will give the first spell each turn you cast from Exile Cascade. As you've seen by now, one of the synergy lines in this deck is actually casting spells from Exile. When we do so, this card will generate us a ton of value by just cascading into a new spell and also casting that for free. And Cascade also counts as casting a spell from Exile. So the spell we just cast from Exile will also trigger all the other cast from Exile synergies in this deck. Goldspan Dragon, a 5-mana 4/4 flying haste creature. Whenever this creature attacks or becomes a target of a spell or opponent's control, we get to generate a treasure token. Due to this card having haste, the turn we play it, we can instantly swing with it and generate a treasure token, providing some instant value. But the main reason why this card is in the upgrade section is the second passive ability. All treasure tokens we control will gain the ability that we can tap them, sacrifice them, and add 2 mana to our mana pool, just doubling up on the mana output any of our treasure tokens have. Pretty crazy card for any treasure deck. City of Brass and Mana Confluence. Both these lands add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool at the cost of 1 life. As I mentioned before, any spell we steal with Vaan that's not in mono red colors will actually require us to sacrifice treasure tokens to generate mana of the chosen color to pay for the cost of the stolen spells. With lands like these, you don't actually have to use your treasure tokens to generate mana outside of your own colors. They're pretty expensive lands that in your deck 90% of the time will just function as expensive mountains, but they do help out the color filtering in this deck by a ton. Passionate Archaeologist. It's a 2-mana enchantment background. As long as this enchantment is on the battlefield, Vaan will have a new ability. Whenever we cast a spell from Exile, it will deal damage equal to the mana cost of that spell to target opponent. Yeah, casting cards with Etali, cards with Vaan's trigger, cascading into cards, casting cards we exiled from our own library, all these cards will trigger Passionate Archaeologist, and it will just result in us doing a ton of damage to our opponents. It honestly is an auto-include in a deck like this, but it does have quite a hefty price tag. Embercleave, a 6-mana equipment with flash. The cost of Embercleave is reduced by 1 generic mana for each attacking creature we control. So if we are swinging with 4 creatures, which yeah, we will be doing a ton of the time, you can cast Embercleave for just 2 mana. Whenever Embercleave enters the battlefield, we instantly get to attach it to target creature we control. And since we can play this card on instant speed, you can really surprise your opponents with this. The equipped creature will get +1/1, double strike, and trample. So it will buff a creature we control, allow it to deal combat damage if it is at a huge amount of power thanks to the trample, and thanks to the double strike, we will get double the Vaan triggers. And the last card, but my favorite card in the upgrade section, is Keeper of Secrets. It's a 6-mana first strike haste demon creature, and the effect it has is really similar to that of Passionate Archaeologist. list. Whenever we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, this creature will deal damage equal to its mana cost to target opponent. With the amount of spells we'll be casting, this will just result in you taking someone out of the game with this. And having this effect attached to a 6/4 first strike haste body is actually pretty awesome. That's it for my €50 hyper budget Vaan Street Thief in-depth deck. It's a tribal deck, it's interactive, he's a value engine, and no one is talking about him, which honestly is what I love most in any commander. If you made it this far in the video, drop a pirate flag emoji in the comments below, so I know you're a part of the endgame crew of these type of videos. If there are any cards you think I missed and should be included in the deck, leave them in the comments below. I always read and reply to every single one of them. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.